Literacy Academy Live 2022. I'm Dr. Melissa Weber-Mayer, the Director of the Office of Approaches to Teaching and Professional Learning at the Ohio Department of Education, and I'm so excited to welcome you to our Literacy Academy Live Keynote Conversation Series. So the content for this year's Literacy Academy Live was carefully designed to help bring Ohio's plan to raise literacy achievement to life. As you know, Ohio's vision is for all learners to acquire the knowledge and skills to become proficient readers. And we know that language literacy provide the foundation for future success. Ohio's Literacy Academy Live provides professional learning to support the use of evidence-based language and literacy practices for districts and schools and early childhood education programs. This year's Literacy Academy Live features 4 conversations between national experts, bringing the lens of both research and classroom practice to their topics. It is our hope that these conversations support us on our journey to improve literacy outcomes for all students. So as we watch and interact with each of these keynote sessions, consider how this information will support implementation of evidence-based literacy practices and the systems changes that may be needed to ensure success. Equity is embedded in both Ohio's plan to raise literacy achievement and Each Child Our Future, Ohio's strategic plan for education. Ohio is committed to creating the learning conditions that ensure each child acquires the knowledge and skills they need to be successful. We are so fortunate to have Dr. Doug Fisher and Kareem Weaver share their expertise with us on how leaders can support equity in their buildings and districts by improving the quality of literacy instruction for each child. As you listen to their conversation, consider the steps that school leaders in your building or district can take to ensure all students are receiving high-quality literacy instruction.
In this conversation, we'll look at practical steps that school leaders can take to do a better job at ensuring high-quality literacy instruction for all kids.
We'll consider what the research says about the opportunity gaps and whether literacy can really be that lever for equity.
Sound good? Those topics pique your interest?
If so, stay with us.
Weaver, longtime educator, co-founder of Fulcrum, which is Full and Complete Reading as a Universal Mandate. I'm also on the Education Committee for the NAACP, both for the Oakland branch and for the California-Hawaii State Conference.
Hi, I'm Doug Fisher, currently Professor of Educational Leadership at San Diego State and a teacher leader at Health Sciences High. I've taught elementary school and high school for more than 20 years. So I'm really pleased to be having this conversation with you, Kareem. I think it's a timely, interesting conversation that we could have. And let's start by thinking around the research on literacy that connects with equity. What would you say would be some of the key takeaways from the research that you think school leaders need to know about related to literacy and the connection to equity?
So first of all, thank you for the question. I think it's an important place to start because equity is kind of an amorphous term nowadays. We don't really build it out. But when it comes to literacy, equity isn't so much a buzzword, but it's the practical things that we're doing. And when you look at, Hattie's research for, visible learning, and it looks at the different effect sizes of what has an impact on student learning, the components of the research that have been, trumpeted by AFT and that other entities who've done research, it really bears out that we combine those things in a way in a comprehensible program that's systematic, explicit, and directly taught, and that you get the greatest bang for your buck for kids. So that includes, the phonemic awareness and the phonics and the comprehension and the oral language development in there and the writing in there, but also, the fluency. And I mean, you have to put it together in a comprehensible way so that teachers have what they need and students have what they need to actually build a program in a coherent fashion. So what I'd say, when you look at the research, instead of picking and choosing things, we have our individual favorites. The research says collectively, if we do these things, we can ensure that the greatest number of kids possible get what they need so that they can move forward their literacy development. And I'd ask you the same question. What do you think school leaders should know about that?
Well, yeah, and I agree with you. I really appreciate your points, so I won't restate them. But as you were talking, I was thinking about, do our students know what they are learning? Do they see any relevance in what they're learning? Do they know what success looks like? And I think that having, being clear, teacher clarity is an important part of the research. And as leaders, when we walk in classrooms, let's ask a couple randomly selected students, what are you learning today? Stop asking students, what are you doing? Start asking, what are you learning? Follow up with, well, why are you learning that? See if they see relevance in the learning. And then if you're really brave, ask them, how do you know you're going to learn it? And see if that student owns that learning. If that student says, this is how I know I'm going to learn it. There's empowerment there. There's self-regulation there. There is all kinds of abilities for students to say, this is my learning. This is the learning I'm going to do.
When I hear that, it sounds like you're advocating for students to take ownership and to make sure that they have the agency they need to understand what they're learning and why they're learning it. And I agree wholeheartedly with that. And I want to also just make sure that people don't take the leap from there to say, well, if we just make it relevant to the child's life, everything will be all right. We just have, whether it's cultural relevance or whatever it is, like that's wonderful. That's an accelerator. And in many cases, it's a necessary condition to get kids motivated and engaged. Yes, but there are some things that we know that if we don't have them as core elements of an effective reading program, the majority of kids won't get where they need to go.
Right.
And that may sound crazy coming from somebody from the NAACP, but it's wonderful that we want to connect kids to their history. It's wonderful that we want to make sure that they have the agency they need to kind of direct their own learning or promote their own their own journey for literacy development. And as school leaders, we have to make sure that the kids and the teachers understand the steps to growth. And that those steps are explicitly taught rather than implicitly taught, and that there's no substitute for that. And so there's a conversation that's technical, and then there's also some of these adaptive challenges that, that school leaders have to wrestle with. And so I'd ask you, as a person who's been in the field, about practical steps that folks can take from a technical side. To make sure that, quality literacy instruction is actually happening in the building and that it's occurring in an equitable manner.
Yeah. So, and I want to emphasize systematic, planned, purposeful instruction is part of equity, not piecemeal, not fragmented,
That's right.
not low expectations, not below grade level teaching and learning. And on top of that, I think part of my response to your question is, and I'll give you a specific example here, is around teacher modeling. We are seeing a significant decrease in teacher modeling. Opening up our brains, explaining our thinking, being metacognitively aware of our thinking, inviting students into our minds so they can see one example of how you might accomplish this, whatever this standard is. And we've seen a pretty significant decline in the amount of teacher modeling. And I've been thinking, like, how do young people ever then apprentice cognitively into these skills and concepts if that's not happening? And the modeling phase is our opportunity to introduce students to grade level thinking. They get to hear what it's like to think like a fourth grader or an eighth grader. It's not below grade level. And so if we're not engaged in think alouds and modeling and demonstrations, we're probably selling students short. It's not, to reverse the conversation a little bit there. Student ownership doesn't mean do-it-yourself school. And I think that's the mistake people make is, it's ownership, so do whatever. Here's a worksheet or whatever. That's not what I'm talking about. I want students to know what they are learning, why they are learning things, and how they will know that they learned it. But those things have to be important, valuable skills, concepts, ideas, strategies that will improve their overall literacy performance.
There was a time when the phrase principal or the term principal was actually head teacher. In fact, some places it's still head in England, head teacher. And I think now, if we're talking to school leaders, and we're thinking about what they could do to actually change, literacy practices and outcomes in their building, I would say that's the mindset that they have to have. That they actually have to become the head teacher and not just the administrator. Administration and policy is great. Rules and regulations are fine, but we're not going to rubric our way out of this thing necessarily. We actually have to, as you say, make sure people can see things, and that's students, but also kids and the leadership team. So, people should be taking visits and going to see things in different schools and different environments, or seeing their neighbors and the practices they have to share and open up practice to share things. But then also, collectively, teachers have to believe that they're what makes the difference. That goes back to the whole visible learning and the collective teacher effort. It's not just the rah-rah stuff. That's wonderful, growth mindset, great. But it's also, it's us. We actually can drive. It's the opposite of the old Coleman report where Coleman said, kid, you can't change the outcomes. No, it's us.
Yeah.
And that means that the head teacher or principal and assistant principal and coaches, but the leadership has to be intentional about winning hearts and minds. Because at this point, some of the other methods of instruction, balanced literacy and different things, it's not just curriculum or even a method of instruction. I would go so far as to say it's become a culture within our field. And you're not going to shame people out of a culture. It's not like, that's not an effective change management strategy. Shame. You actually have to engage people and make the cases, whether it be technical, evidentiary, moral, or whatever the cases that need to be made to your staff. We have to be willing to engage people on those terms and provide them the support and reduce some of the dissonance that they may have because of what they've been taught, whether it's in their university prep program or previously in the school site. Well, let me ask you this: in your work as a school leader, how do you address, in terms of getting teachers to shift or to be open to making shifts? How would you approach that? How have you navigated that?
Awesome. So I'll emphasize the power of the collective that you were talking about earlier. And I really appreciate it's not just rah-rah, it's It's that the team believes, as you said, that they have the power to influence learning. That comes in form of expectations. They also have evidence that they are, in fact, influencing learning, and it feeds that cycle. We are powerful. We have evidence we are powerful. We have high expectations for our students, and we have evidence that they can get there. So that cycle is really important. In terms of, as a leader, the things I work on, I bring the teams together. We talk about where students are, what's the unfinished learning that our students have, how do we address that, what are the best moves forward, and we make agreements as a staff. I'll give you a very simple example. There are a lot of minutes spent on providing the instructions, not the instruction. Every time we have a new strategy, routine, whatever in the classroom, it's going to take some minutes to explain it to students. Those minutes start to add up. If it's 5 minutes a period times 180 days, that's a lot of minutes of instructions. And so I'll speak to middle school, high school for a moment. If they change classes 4, 5, 6 times a day, those are a lot of minutes being spent on the instructions. So imagine a group of teachers coming together and saying, here are a handful of go-to routines for students to work together. Anytime we use these, they will be so transparent that students know immediately what to do. And we save all those minutes for learning. Now, if there's a new activity and a new strategy, yes, you're going to have to devote some minutes to the instructions. But imagine having 5 or 6 or 8 go-to routines that every student in the school knew, every teacher in the school knew, and that they are used with automaticity. So if I say reciprocal teaching, if I say 5-word summary, if I say jigsaw, a few of these at our school, it doesn't matter what class I'm in. All the students know how to do that. All the teachers know how to do it. And it saves us so many minutes that we can devote to learning.
It's a simple thing, but time is the most precious resource in schools. It really is, even more so than finances. It's the time. There isn't enough time, whether it's planning or time to deliver lessons, etc. So, 5-10 minutes a day over 180 school days, you're talking about multiple days saved.
Yes.
Which can, if it's then converted into instruction, and learning, how powerful that would be. Wow. And I think, that's but the key in that was agreement. So you said that the staff has to then come together to make agreements about whatever it is, what it's the routine, what's the structure, whatever. And, having instructional agreements and protocols from a leadership perspective, especially for a leadership team, to say, hey, look, guys, I want you to come up with 3 protocols that can be agreed upon and implemented throughout the building, and let them carry it, let them hold it. And they can get feedback from people and whatever the case may be. But doing that could literally claim learning time that is otherwise just wasted unnecessarily, which could be redirected constructively.
Yep.
That's good stuff. Well, let me add to that too.
Yeah.
Because I think there are lots of, when we're talking about literacy instruction, I remember, so I used to lead new leaders for new schools in the Western region, and we would train principals, and I had to realize, I had to go back to my own experience as a principal and remember when I tried to start an initiative and it didn't work the way I wanted to. And I'd tell the people that we're training, and I'd say, listen, I've tried it and I failed. So I think in terms of credibility, when you're trying to make changes, there's a certain level of honesty that just goes with the territory. And there's this feeling like if they know I didn't do something well, or if they know I failed, or if I advocated for something differently 2 years ago. 2 years ago, I was, promoting balanced literacy. Now I'm doing a structured approach, and so they're wondering where I stand. So leaders have to actually ground themselves anew and be able to have those conversations about why they're making shifts. And oftentimes we fear the unknown, how people respond to us, my credibility as a leader. But I would offer the same thing I offered to our trainees and new leaders, which is like that actually is your superpower as a leader. People are not looking for perfection. They're looking for vulnerability and honesty. They're looking for your credibility comes with the level of engagement with truth you have. Mm-hmm. And your ability to stand on that. And I know there are people who may see this, their principals, and they say, if I tell them this, or if I say we're going to start doing this, they might as well get rid of me because I was the main one championing something different. Okay, maybe they do. and maybe it's not your season in that building. Mm-hmm. But what I would say is that if you're going to lead and try to get the greatest number of kids to read as possible, that means you've got to come from a place of truth with your staff so that there can be some trust and some vulnerability to do the kinds of things you're talking about, mm-hmm. which is, collective efficacy, which is coming up with instructional plans together and routines together. This collective ethos has to start by somebody saying, you know what? I think I was off. The research actually shows that the way to get the greatest number of kids to reading is over here, and I had been doing it this way. Maybe it's because I was directed, maybe because I thought better or didn't know better, whatever it is, but there's a certain level of transparency that people have to have for their leadership to have credibility. It's not the title on your door doesn't make you the leader. It's more of your ability to engage with people and lead them through these minefields. So I'm wondering from your experience, but that's a very vulnerable place to be. Mm-hmm. Do you see leaders, school principals specifically, what's the value of vulnerability and transparency in terms of getting people on the same page and leading them into a new direction? Can you speak to that a little bit?
Yeah, and I think you're hitting all the points. Being vulnerable, being honest. I was anticipating your words. Vulnerable, honest, etc. And I think we have to be vulnerable. We have to say, let's take the best evidence we have and let's put it into practice. Yes, this field learns so much every year. Some things are reinforcing of what we know, some things new and change direction, as you said. We are in this continual quest to raise the literacy rates of our students. And we need to be willing to make adjustments and change and implement when evidence is there to suggest that. I think teaching teams, leadership groups, vulnerability is important, and some confidence that the leader knows how to do these things. Yeah, I may not have all the answers, and I'm happy to explore and hear ideas and send people for learning opportunities and come back and let's share. But I think teams of teachers also want to know someone is taking us through this process. It's not going to be chaos because there's a leader there who has a vision. I don't always have to know all the what parts, but I have to have ideas about how. Yeah. I can't just be heavy. I mean, imagine coming to school, okay, you will all do the following. That hasn't really worked. I mean, the exception is some of the COVID protocols. We had to put something, this is non-negotiable in place for safety. Right. But other than that, it's around coming to agreements, coming to consensus. I think that too often we create these initiatives and then we end up with compliance rather than commitment. Mm-hmm. So there was rules in our district years ago about having the standards on the wall. And people became very cynical about it. I mean, that was a popular thing around the country. Put the standards on the wall. Remember those days?
I remember.
And everyone did it because you're going to get in trouble if you didn't. Right. It was there was no commitment to students learning from that.
Right. What's the point?
So today when we say, what do students learn? People are like, do I have to put it on the wall? I don't know. I don't know if that's going to help or not. I can't find any research on that. What I can find is if a learner knows what they're supposed to be learning, they're 3 times more likely to actually learn it. So however you make this happen, if the learner knows what they're learning, so much more likely to actually learn something. So the vulnerability on the what side, the vulnerability on I made a mistake. We tried this. It didn't work. What can we do next? And some confidence to lead through the process.
And that's no small thing. We tried this and it didn't work. For some people, they will have internalized whatever that thing is, and it's hard to let go. Mm-hmm. It's also hard to change something. What change also means is I have to spend more of my own time figuring this stuff out. Mm-hmm. I have to forsake whatever the instructional routines I had with this program or curriculum or method of instruction, and that takes time. It takes brain time. It takes physical time. It takes everything. I'm thinking about it. I have to do some more research. I have to work with I got to start over again. It's like starting over a new relationship. I just don't want to start over. Mm-hmm. And, time is the most precious resource in schools. And so if you want people to do that, you got to be able to make the case. So quick story, I said I failed once before. I was a principal of an elementary school once, and I wanted to do a computer program. I wanted to make sure everyone knew their math multiplication tables. And it was a computer program, 10 minutes a day. Just put the kids on the computer, 10 minutes a day, they'll learn it. And got the computers, set up the labs, made sure all the headphones, everything was working. I had the tech crew come in, raise the money. The whole thing was just ran it like that. And then showed them how to do it. And after a couple of months, actually around Christmas time, so it was a few months, I looked at the data and it was really only one class that was half-heartedly doing it. Well, he was doing it. One class was doing it. The rest weren't doing it. I couldn't believe it. I'm like, how could they not? All you got to do is put them on the computer for 10 minutes. They'll learn their times tables. WTH, what's going on here? Now, I brought in a union leader, my buddy Tom, and I was livid. I was very disappointed. I was trying to hide in my face. And he said, Weaver, you didn't sell it. I said, what do you mean? He said, you didn't sell it. He said, you came in, you told us this, you had a meeting, you had a PD, you talked about it, you made the case, but you didn't really sell it. Man, that thing haunted me, man, all break. And what I realized is I had laid it out. I had rolled out the initiative and I had taken care of all the technical stuff. But I didn't really put my heart into it. And if I'm being really honest, it was because I didn't feel I needed to. It's good for kids. Why should I, especially as a Black man, have to convince mostly white teachers what they need to do to help? And so I told them what to do, and I tried to make the case, but my heart wasn't in it. So I went back, I made a new PowerPoint deck, I did all that stuff, and I pitched it hard, and I really made the case, the moral case, the crime statistics and college access and the dropout classes, algebra, and you got to be pre-algebra, which means multiplication, division, and fractions, and then I broke it all down. I really put my heart. Man, by the end of the year, we had 87% of kids at mastery level. And I said to myself, you mean the only thing between them and knowing and getting what they needed was me as a school leader? And I had to own that because I let I don't know, it's hard to even talk about, but I got in the way, even when I was trying to do the right thing, because I wasn't giving the teachers what they needed. It wasn't about me and my racial identity and this and that. The teachers needed a certain thing from me. So what I would say to the school leaders who are listening to this is, what do the people in your building need from you? And who can you talk to about that? Who's going to give you honest feedback about the culture, about whatever else? Hey, we actually kind of need this from you. Because that you have to give them what they need and meet them where they are. Some people need the evidence, just show the research and go visit some schools that are working. Others need you to do what you said and say, listen, I'm going to be with you right next to the way, every step of the way. You can be vulnerable with me. Some people need that. So I would offer that to folks in addition to what you said, which is make sure you're giving people what they need and be willing and able to make the case. maybe we should talk about tangible steps that people can do as school leaders to to help shift literacy practices in their building. Are there any specifics that you would highlight for them?
Well, Kareem, when you were talking, I kept thinking about expectations. And I've been on this quest. When I visit a class, how do I know that the teacher has high expectations? And someone said to me, well, you know it when you see it. I want more than that. I want to be able to say, here are things that say to me that this teacher has high expectations. And so I'll give it to you first. How do you, because you and I both have had opportunities to work with principals, to work with schools, to work with faculties. How do we know that people have high expectations? And then if they don't, we'll have to get to what do we do about it. Were you willing to start on that? I think we have to I would like to figure out when I walk in a classroom, how I know there are high expectations.
So first of all, let me just encourage everybody to, if they don't have a leadership team that's functional, they need to get one. A coalition of the willing who are willing to dive into some of this stuff together. Because that is a question that leadership teams should be wrestling with. That is like step one. We go out to lunch and we talk about what does it look like, because they'll get lots of buzzwords and equity and this and that, but then you get down to the nitty gritty of it. So what does that mean during a math lesson? What does that mean during a literacy lesson or whatever? Now, for me and our team, we always looked at the task at hand. So not to get overly technical, but what are we asking children to do? And is it appropriate? Is it rigorous? And I'm not saying there's a difference between something being challenging,
yes,
versus something being, aligned to the standards and rigorous and appropriate for that grade level. I'm not saying just have kids busy,
right, doing
difficult tasks. That's not what I'm saying. Is the task grade level appropriate? Mm-hmm. Are we doing grade level appropriate tasks consistently? You mentioned in the opening about the opportunity gap. Mm-hmm. There's work out there that says some kids don't get access to grade level work.
Yep.
On a consistent basis. So the first thing is, in terms of the first thing is, what are we asking kids to do in the tasks? The second thing is, what do we expect kids to be able to understand about the work? And what I mean by that is this. Another. I hate to keep going back to Hattie, but I love this one. One of his earlier versions of the visible learning breakdown was about making learning transparent to kids. Mm-hmm. And basically, it's do you unpack the learning with kids? So, for example, if we have a class and there's an essay, so for example, are we actually unpacking what an A looks like? Are we actually explaining the level of rigor? Are we making it clear, or are we holding it and making ourselves the center of subjectivity in terms of how we determine excellence and proficiency? So I would say making that transparent, not just to kids, but also to parents. Mm-hmm. High expectations means we're clear about what our expectations are, mm-hmm. and we consistently apply them to every student. It also means that we don't rest on a wait to fail model. Right. It has to do with, when do the alarm bells go off when kids aren't meeting certain targets that are laid out systematically, explicitly and directly. And then when kids don't reach those targets, do we say, oh, well, they just need more time? Or do we say, no, wait a second, they didn't reach the target. How are we now going to not just reteach, right? But how are we going to ensure that they have the scaffolds they need to get what they have? So to me, it's the timing of intervention, being able to identify quickly and efficiently and then intervene in a strategic, targeted way. It is being transparent about what we expect from kids in terms of what excellence looks like and the steps to get there, both for the students and the parents. And then, also just being with them, just being very, very clear about what we expect from them, and not deviating for that based upon any preconceived notions of what a child can or can't do. So that's what I'd offer. What's your perspective on that?
Well, I appreciate that. So I'm reflecting on this teacher who told me that they were very, very rigorous. And I said, well, high expectations. I have high expectations for all of my students. And I said, well, how do you know that? And the person said, well, more than 50% of my students fail the class. I'm like, well, that's not what I'm talking about, right?
Wow.
That's what you were saying, the difference between difficulty, making things hard for students, versus the complexity of thinking we're trying to get from students. And so now part of my definition is, yes, we have grade level, but just in time and just in case scaffolds ready. We don't just watch a bunch of kids fail.
Mm-hmm.
Part of my newer thinking on this has been influenced by Ruby Davies in New Zealand, where we're over differentiation. And I would be very careful on this one because people get really nervous here. We should provide scaffolding differentiation during our instructional framework, but we don't say at the end of the day, the end of the week, the end of the semester, differentiation of your learning outcomes. Mm-hmm. We don't say, you don't have to learn this. You don't need to learn this. And that's what starts to happen, is that we tend to over differentiate rather than saying, we can differentiate these processes. We can show you 3 ways to do this. We can provide additional scaffolding, more just-in-time kinds of scaffolds for you. We might have additional small group instruction, for example, whatever that takes. But we hold you and me. The agreement is, you're going to reach this level. That we're going to aim for this. We're going to reach it. We're going to keep cycling back and providing lots of supports when you need it. And so I'm really liking this phrase that I heard at a conference, and now I can't even remember who said it. The scaffolds have to be just in time and just in case. Because we over scaffold for some learners. Yes. Well-meaning, well-intended, we reduce the struggle.
That reminds me, so my youngest child was recently diagnosed with dyslexia, and 16 years old. It's a whole nother story. But when we went to have the initial meeting at the school, and she went to traditional public schools, K through 8, and then she was struggling, so it was just a battle. We ended up putting her in a private school, and she was better. But it came to a point, once she got the diagnosis, we were so relieved, we were so excited. And we went and talked to the counselor, and we said, listen, and I was a bulldog, I admit. Mm-hmm. Like, look, it says my kid's supposed to get this, my kid's supposed to get that, she's supposed to get this many assignments instead of that many assignments. And she looked at me, this is a college prep school, and she said, I understand where you're coming from, but we don't modify. We accommodate. Mm-hmm. I said, what are you telling me? I have this document that's signed that says she gets this. She said, yes, but those are accommodations. They're not modifications. And there's a difference. And, I thought about that, which is, I think sometimes from good reasons, for very heartfelt, loving, caring reasons, we confuse those two.
Yep.
Not just because we're a mother or father who's advocating for our kid, but because we want to see our kids be successful in the moment.
Yep.
And we think the way to get them there is to modify. But we can actually build bridges so that kids can get where they need to go. It takes work, and it takes planning, and it takes professional development, but they can do it. And actually, maybe we can touch a little bit on this issue of dyslexia. When I did my education program, I don't think I heard that word one time. Literally didn't hear that one. But now it's all over the place, not just because of my own kid, but I also work with the penitentiary system here in California, unfortunately, and they're very familiar with it. But as educators, we're kind of playing catch up here a little bit. Where do you start as a school leader delving into a new topic like this, which it matters? I mean, kids have processing differences, and Department of Ed has said that it's one of the greatest reasons why low achievement for reading in the state of California. Do you have any thoughts about how principals should approach this? Is this something they should just kick to their leadership team, or is it something that they need to lead specifically on? Any thoughts on dyslexia as something that they need to be thinking about?
Yeah, and I think that I know that there are new expectations for teachers and leaders to learn about dyslexia in many states, and including ours where we live. But I wish that we were at a place where we were using our resources for reading specialists, people who deeply, deeply understood the complexity of teaching that brain to read. Every single brain has to be taught to read. We do not pass this from generation to generation to generation. And the vast majority of kids are probably going to learn to read from the instruction they receive in school. Mm-hmm. But there's a group of kids, 20%, that without some pretty sophisticated supports are not going to succeed. And there's specialized knowledge out there. And I feel like we have, we see a decrease in the number of reading specialists in school. We don't see a decrease in the other designated instructional services. We don't see a decrease in speech therapy hours or OTPT hours, but we see a decrease in reading specialists. And I think the assumption now is everyone can do this. Everyone can teach reading. And I do think the vast majority of elementary teachers know how to teach reading. I believe that. But as you said earlier, it's time and intensity. And some kids need a specialist who comes in, who has deep knowledge and the time to assess and design interventions. Classroom teachers can help implement them, but I think we've missed out on having that expertise. So I'll tell you, at our school, we hired 2 reading specialists, and I work at a high school because in the secondary system, there's less knowledge about the kinds of things that you're talking about how reading works, about how to automate those processes, where's the phonological loop, how are we recruiting things. So all of those processes are less in the knowledge base of high school people.
Well, you say that may be the case to high school, but I can tell you elementary and middle school, it's much the same. Mm-hmm. It's hard for folks to do things that haven't been taught.
Right.
And most teacher prep programs, pre-service, they're just not teaching that consistently. And I would just add by saying that this has to be a season of learning. Mm-hmm. This has to be a season of learning where we're very, very intentional about the opportunities we give folks to learn. And people at different levels. So maybe you offer a la carte services. I know AIM Pathways has something for leadership as well as for teachers. There's other entities out there. There's OG training, Orton Gillingham training. There's the Reading League that have their a la carte thing. There's stuff all over the place. Very good stuff. But this is the season for learning. And the principal or the head teacher really needs to be leading the way along with the leadership team. Because you're right. You can't expect people to do things that they weren't trained to do and that they don't have aligned materials to support with. So there's a school out here in Oakland. I engage with a lot of our local schools and the system, but actually the individual schools, and their PTA has a reading specialist. They have raised the money to pay for this reading specialist, and if they don't know what to do, or if the kid has been identified, they know they're dyslexic, they come to her. And she's talking to me like, listen, and I'm doing the work, the kids are growing, they're learning, but how come everybody doesn't have this?
Right.
So there's an equity piece to that. Yep. I don't begrudge those parents one bit.
Right.
Do what you have to do to help your kids. And we all have to have the mindset of saying, listen, this is my season of learning. And if I or my team don't really know how to support the kids, if we don't have them, then maybe we have to consider, as a leader, maybe we have to consider other avenues. As a principal, I remember hiring a friend of mine part-time. We taught together for years, and she was an expert in literacy. And I was like, sis, I need you. I need you. I got 2 classes. It's not, whatever the context was, I need you to come here and I got some babies need to learn how to read. And she came part-time. And there are creative things that you can do, whether it's through the PTA or whether it's your categorical funds or whatever, working with your SSC, your site council, or whatever the committee is that helps you navigate those categorical funds. But you got to figure out how to get them what they need. And what I would offer, and this is a little different than your take on it. So I would say that at the end of that journey, folks will come to realize, oh, wait a second. If we treat every student, what if we had to frame the kids with dyslexia? I call them the canaries in the coal mine.
Mm-hmm.
If they're falling out, it's because there's some things that aren't present.
Yeah.
Sooner or later, those things are going to get the other kids too.
Yeah.
So we have to make sure that those kids are all right. If we make those students our North Star, so to speak, you'll find that everyone's thriving.
Mm-hmm.
And so but there's also this issue of people not wanting to be labeled, especially in minority communities where there is some real fear about special ed and having kids shipped off somewhere, usually for behavioral reasons, but not getting what they need. Yep. There's a stigma attached to that as well. So that, in many circumstances, people say, well, dyslexia is a white diagnosis, which is ridiculous, but it's more of who has the advocacy to get the testing, to do the things that you need to do to even get the diagnosis in the first place. Right. So I would just urge people to make this a season of learning and to make sure that if your core tier 1 materials, if you're going through the process of purchasing or deciding what to get, make sure that they have things embedded in the materials that support those students. So during your season of learning, you can at least rest assured that if I just follow this, I'll at least be on the right track. That's what I'd offer as well. Are there any other resources that you might want to lift up for folks to take with them as we head out?
Sure. International Dyslexia Association. There's all kinds of groups advocating. International Literacy Association, more generally about how literacy works. But as you were talking, I was hearing a Yuri Bronfenbrenner quote in my mind. I won't get exactly the words right. To paraphrase, what he said was, every child needs at least one adult who is absolutely crazy about them. And that's what I heard you talk about your daughter. And that's what I heard you talk about when you had those kids in school who were having a difficult time reading. And what I think when I read the book, when I read his book, it's all about more, child development. But when he talks about crazy, he means you're willing to do anything for this young person's development. On that topic, before I go, I was thinking about this. So as you said earlier in our conversation, there are all kinds of things that people are already doing from previous initiatives. There are lingering things out there.
Yeah.
And as leaders, we have to do an inventory of the current state of practice and then figure out what we want to stop seeing.
Yes.
What we need to de-implement.
That's right.
Before we try to implement. So let's take the reading experience that you're talking about. What are we seeing when we walk in the classroom that is left over? It maybe used to work, maybe it never worked, maybe it was part of a different program and there's a fraction of it left, whatever that is. I'll take a very simple example. We still see round robin reading when we visit some classrooms. It strikes terror in the heart of a kid with a reading-related disability. It strikes terror in their heart. And they start counting, and they start trying to practice that paragraph that they're going to be required to read out loud. And then they desperately beg to go to the bathroom to be away from that. We know this. There's no evidence that this works. How do we get people to stop doing that? And I think that's an easy one. There are all kinds of things that we need to de-implement, systematically teach people to unlearn so that the good things, the current thinking, has a chance of getting in there.
And that goes to your credibility as a leader.
Mm-hmm.
Are you going to layer more stuff on top of this? That tells me how disconnected you are. You hit the nail on the head. I was in a school 2 days ago here in Oakland, and going through the different classrooms with the team I was with, I saw level literacy intervention, LLI, Fondness of Pinnell. I saw foundations curriculum.
Mhm.
I saw, I saw no fewer than 6 different things in motion in school. It's like it's Swiss cheese, and they have an emphasis on reading, but everybody's got their thing, because as you go through these initiatives, somebody's going to cling onto that stuff. It works for someone.
Yep.
And so as a principal or school in the school leadership capacity, doing the work to actually deconstruct some of that stuff and get it out the building, or have the conversation about results and effectiveness. I think that if you don't do anything else, what we're talking about today, the credibility can come from just realizing, hey, what can I take off people's plates? Because you have some people who don't care. They're like, whatever, I'm going to do what I want to do. But there are some people who every time there's an initiative, they follow it. They've got 5 or 6 layers of things, and they're out of gas. Mm-hmm. So being able to come in and just say, hey, no, let's look at all these different things. Let's clear the deck of the stuff that doesn't work, evidentially wise, doesn't work, not just our feelings. That'll go a long way towards establishing credibility. I really appreciate you saying that, Doug. I really do. Well, listen, we're going to wrap up and just thank everybody. We know the role of school leadership is difficult, and that this season in particular, where there's a shift in, I would say, collective ethos around the country about how can we best get the greatest number of kids to read. It's trying times, but leadership definitely matters. It always has, and it always will. So we want to encourage you to kind of fight the good fight. Hopefully we've left some nuggets for you here today to think about as a result of this conversation. Doug, did you have anything that you wanted to leave folks with?
I appreciate the conversation with you. And I think that we remind people, Paul Manna's comment, principals are the magnifiers of effective practices in their school.
Leave you with that. Thank you all.
Thank you. Good to
bye-bye.
see you, Kareem. Great to connect with you.
Same here. Good to see you, Doug.